Good evening, my friends. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. If you're listening, chances are you're looking for something gentle, something steady, to help guide you toward rest. You are in the right place. Tonight, our story drifts across deserts and evenings long past, where people learn to survive not by fighting the world, but by listening to its rhythm. It may sound distant, yet you may find the echoes familiar, as if they've been waiting quietly for you all along. Before we begin, I invite you to take part in a small ritual. If you enjoy these calm wanderings, feel free to gently press like or subscribe, so you can always return when sleep is slow to arrive. And if you'd like, leave a note in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from, and perhaps what time the clock reads in your part of the world. Now, let's ease into the night. Dim the lights, or let the lamp cast a soft halo across the room. Maybe a fan hums at your side, or the window is open so the night breeze can stir the curtains. Imagine a chair by the fire, or the hush of stars outside, and let your shoulders release the weight of the day. And so we begin with the first part of our long journey together. A quiet wish drifts like lantern light in the dusk. Somewhere in every heart, there is a wish that never announces itself too loudly. It doesn't crash into the room, it doesn't demand attention, and yet it lingers, patient as a lantern glowing in the far corner of the evening. Tonight, we begin with that kind of wish, the yearning for rest, for comfort, for a place where the air is kind and the burdens are light enough to carry. Picture an older woman seated by her window, the glass faintly cool against her hand. She is not restless, not exactly, but her thoughts wander. Outside, the street has grown quiet. The world has folded itself into softer shapes. She doesn't ask for riches, or triumphs, or even answers. She asks silently for a little peace that lasts long enough to ease her breathing. That is the wish that begins so many stories of survival, though rarely is it written down. In the old deserts, people carried the same longing. Imagine the heat pressing in, not with violence, but with a steady insistence, the way a blanket presses across your chest. You cannot shout at the sun to be cooler. You cannot demand the wind to soften. All you can do is wish for a shade that lingers, a sip of water that tastes like grace, a night where the stars promise calm instead of emptiness. The Bedouins of Arabia knew this wish well, and they learned not to chase it, but to carry it with them, step after deliberate step. Think of a traveler at dusk, drawing his camel to a halt, listening for the faintest trickle of water. He is not panicked. He does not curse the day. He simply lets the wish rise in him. May there be shade ahead. May there be coolness. May there be enough. That wish, that quiet longing, is what kept him moving across landscapes that would have broken louder hearts. Closer to home, we know that wish in other forms. It shows itself in the way someone lingers over a steaming cup of tea, not to wake themselves up, but to slow themselves down. It shows in the way hands smooth a blanket across tired legs. It is present when we turn the key in the door at night and feel relief in the hush that greets us. Small, nearly invisible moments, yet they carry the entire weight of longing. And if you listen closely, longing has a sound. It is not a cry. It is more like the hush of leaves stirred by an evening wind. It asks nothing more than to be acknowledged, to know that someone sees it, hears it, and quietly says, "Yes, I understand." The Bedouins built their lives around this understanding. They didn't expect the desert to change for them. They changed themselves to match the desert's rhythm. They woke before dawn, not because they enjoyed the hour, but because it was the only time the air was tender. They wrapped themselves in flowing cloth, not as fashion, but as protection, as their own portable shade. They paused at noon, not out of laziness, but out of respect, for heat so fierce that to challenge it was to invite ruin. Each choice, each act, was a way of answering the quiet wish. Let me endure. Let me rest. Let me belong here a little longer. There is something shocking, in its own quiet way, about how little they fought against the impossible. We often imagine survival as defiance, as victory over the elements. But in the desert, survival was gentleness itself. A traveler who rushed, who shouted against the heat, who ignored the body's pleas, he did not last long. The ones who did endure were the ones who listened, who slowed, who allowed longing to be a guide rather than an enemy. It's worth asking, how often do we ignore our own quiet wishes? How often do we push past the longing for rest in the name of duty or distraction? Perhaps tonight the story offers permission to do what the Bedouins did, to accept the rhythm instead of resisting it, to say, the day is over, now let me sit, let me breathe, let me wait for coolness. In time, the desert always gave its small mercies. A shadow stretched long across the sand, a well discovered by memory rather than map, a night wind that restored the body after the cruel blaze of day. Those mercies did not erase the hardship, but they answered the longing just enough to keep life moving forward. And in your own room tonight, perhaps the same mercies are here. The hum of a fan, the softness of a pillow, the memory of voices you have loved. You do not need to demand sleep. You need only to let the quiet wish glow in the corner and trust that it will lead you toward the shade you seek. Small desires glow softly, waiting to be understood. There is a difference between what we ask out loud and what we keep hidden in the folds of our thoughts. Out loud, we might ask for a glass of water, a warmer blanket, a story to pass the time. But in the quiet, the desires grow softer, less certain, and more enduring. They are not needs to be shouted. They are more like shadows cast by the setting sun, long, patient, and unmistakable. Tonight, we step into those shadows. Imagine again the woman by her window, her hand resting on the wooden sill. She has lived long enough to know that wishes rarely appear in grand form. Instead, they flicker quietly in the edges of her evening. The hope that someone remembers her voice, the wish for a breeze that carries a familiar scent, the desire to be less alone with her thoughts. These are not demands. They are shadows of desire, subtle but steady. The desert people knew this feeling intimately. Their longings were rarely extravagant. They wished for shade, not palaces. They hoped for a drink, not rivers. They wanted company by the fire, not festivals with music. Even the smallest comfort, a palm tree casting a sliver of shadow, a cup of tea passed hand to hand, was enough to answer the quiet shadows. It is almost shocking, isn't it, to think that tea in a furnace of heat could be considered mercy. And yet it was. The Bedouins would brew it hot, deliberately, so that the body might sweat, cooling itself more efficiently. To the outsider, it seemed absurd. To those who lived there, it was wisdom. One desire met another, the wish for refreshment answered not by ice, but by warmth. It is a quiet reversal, a soft shock hidden in the simplicity of a cup. Shadows of desire also fell across the tents they called home, woven from goat hair, dark and low. These shelters were no palaces, yet within them lay the satisfaction of safety, the relief of family gathered close, and the steady rhythm of daily life. A stranger might see only hardship, black fabric against blinding sand, But inside, someone was pouring tea, a child was dozing against their mother's arm, and stories were being told in hushed tones. In those shadows, desire was answered, not in abundance, but in enough. Think of how similar we are. A quiet house at night holds the same treasures. A lamp glowing in the corner, a quilt pulled up to the chin, a voice on the radio telling stories until the listener drifts. We don't need a chorus of trumpets. We need the small things, the shadows, where desire finds its calm. The shocking part, if shock is the word, is how much of history was built on so little. Empires rose and fell, palaces gleamed and burned, and yet the ordinary longings never changed. People still wanted the comfort of shade, the taste of bread, the relief of a cool breeze. Even a sultan in his marble hall, even a queen in her jeweled chambers, knew these same shadows. Their riches could not banish them. Their armies could not guard against them. Shadows of desire belong to everyone, equal in their quiet insistence. We often imagine longing as restless, but it can also be patient. It lingers, waiting to be noticed. In the desert, people grew skilled at noticing. They read the angle of shadows to tell the time, to judge the path, to measure when it was safe to move. And in those same shadows, they heard the echo of their own desires. Wait a little longer, rest a little deeper, move when the air forgives you. Consider this scene. A traveler pauses beneath a lone acacia tree. The shade is thin, hardly more than a sliver. Yet he lowers himself to the ground as though it were a palace canopy. His camel kneels nearby, its shadow overlapping his. The two of them, man and beast, resting together in a space that could barely fit a single rug. Still, it is enough. The desire for relief is met by the most modest of offerings. This is what it means to survive in the desert, not to defeat it, but to accept its smallest gifts. There is another quiet reversal here. In the modern world, we are taught to want more, always more. Bigger houses, faster cars, louder victories. But the desert whispered a different lesson. More is not always the answer. Sometimes the smallest desire, met with the smallest gift, brings the deepest peace. When evening finally arrived, the shadows lengthened until they merged with night. Families gathered, fires burned low, and in that mingling of shadow and flame, desires found their gentlest answers. Bread was shared, water was sipped, children fell asleep with sand still in their hair, and the elders told stories that stretched farther than the stars. The shock, if there is one, lies in how enduring these patterns remain. Sit by your own lamp tonight, and you might feel the same comfort as a Bedouin under his goat hair tent. Desire has not changed. It is still shadow-shaped, still soft, still asking for nothing more than a place to rest. So let us honor these shadows. Let us notice them, respect them, and answer them when we can. For in the quiet of desire, life reveals its truest rhythm, not the race for glory, but the pause that allows us to breathe. Gentle habits settle the evening into calm rhythm. There is a kind of power in the ordinary, though we often overlook it. We tend to believe that only grand gestures shape the world, crowns placed upon brows, banners lifted to the wind, treaties signed beneath glittering chandeliers. But most of life, the kind that endures, is built instead on small, repeated habits. The hum of daily routine is what steadies the heart. It is what carries us from one day to the next without needing applause. Imagine once more our listener by the window, the night deepening beyond the glass. She folds her shawl around her shoulders, not because she expects company, but because the act itself is comforting. Her hands know this movement so well that they do not need instruction. She might lift the teapot, pour a slow stream into the waiting cup, and rest her fingers around the porcelain, drawing warmth into her palms. No one applauds her for it. And yet, in this ordinary act, she has given herself a measure of peace. The desert people understood this better than most. Their routines were not decorative, they were survival. At dawn, they rose not with excitement, but with necessity. The cool air would not last, and every step taken in those hours mattered. Tents were folded, animals tended, water measured, each action small, quiet, unremarkable to the outsider. But to them, these habits meant life. Without them, the day could not continue. One could say there was a shocking simplicity in how little choice they had. To skip a routine was not rebellion, it was danger. To forget to tie a water skin, to ignore the tightening of a rope, to leave the fire untended. These were not inconveniences, they were potential endings. And so, the ordinary became sacred. A boy watching his father secure the tent learned quickly. Every knot, every fold, every movement mattered. We, too, live by ordinary routines, though we may not see them as clearly. We brush our teeth, we fold the laundry, we water the plants. These are not glamorous moments. They rarely make it into memory books, yet they create the rhythm that allows us to rest. There is comfort in knowing what comes next. When life feels uncertain, the ordinary routines hold us steady. In the desert, routine was also a form of respect. The Bedouins did not demand that the sun change its path. They adjusted their lives to its certainty. When the sun climbed too high, they did not march stubbornly onward. They stopped, set down their loads, and waited. This was not weakness. It was wisdom. They accepted the order of the day and found peace within it. Picture a family gathered at midday, the tent lowered to catch a breath of shade. The father sits cross-legged, eyes half closed, saving his strength. The mother adjusts the cloth panels, keeping sand from settling on the food. The children are hushed, lulled into quiet by the heavy air. Outside, the desert blazes, merciless and indifferent. But inside, routine transforms that furnace into a space of endurance. There is a lesson here for us, though it whispers rather than shouts. When the heat of our own days grows too fierce, perhaps the answer is not to press harder, but to pause, to set aside the task that burns, to rest in the small shade we can create, even if it is only a chair by the fan, a moment with closed eyes, a slow sip of water. Ordinary routines, repeated with care, become a form of survival in any age. The shock, quiet though it is, lies in how fragile these routines can be. Remove them, and life unravels. A forgotten well, a misplaced rope, a skipped meal, each could tilt the balance from safety to peril. And yet, upheld faithfully, the routines created something stronger than walls. They created stability in a land that offered none. Think, too, of the sound of routine. The scrape of a pot, the whisper of cloth drawn tight, the low murmur of voices counting supplies. None of these sounds would impress an outsider, yet together they formed the music of survival. Even the camels played their part, their steady chewing or occasional groans marking the rhythm of camp life. The desert had its own orchestra, and every ordinary action was an instrument. In our own quiet rooms, the same orchestra plays. The kettles whistle, the creak of floorboards, the click of a lamp being turned off. These are not grand notes, but they are deeply familiar. They signal safety, continuity, the promise that nothing has been forgotten. Perhaps this is why such sounds soothe us at night. They remind us that life continues, steady and ordinary. One could imagine a traveler pausing at dusk, folding his robe carefully before lying down. He knows that the order matters. Sand shaken away, cloth smoothed, belt set aside. None of these actions will be remembered by history, but without them, he would not rest. And without rest, he would not rise again to face another day. It is in the ordinaries that the extraordinary endurance is built. And so we return to our listener by the window. She takes another sip of tea, folds the shawl closer, and sighs into the quiet. Her routine has steadied her once again. The shadows outside lengthen, but inside she is at peace. Tiny gestures carry the weight of steady tradition. There are patterns so familiar we scarcely notice them, yet they guide our days like an unseen hand. A folded blanket on the arm of a chair, a cup set carefully on the same wooden coaster, a door closed softly at night with the same turning of the wrist. To others, these gestures might look insignificant, but to the one who performs them, they are small affirmations. The world is in order. I am still here. Life continues. The desert people also lived by such familiar patterns. Imagine the tying of a robe each morning. The knot may have been practiced thousands of times, yet every loop and pull had meaning. A loose knot might catch in the wind. A careless fold could lead to discomfort under the sun. So each gesture, small and practiced, became the difference between peace and hardship. Think of the act of pouring tea, not rushed, not careless. The pot tilted slowly, steam rising into the dry air, the clink of glass against glass, the curve of a hand steadying the cup. To watch such a gesture is to watch a ritual, quiet, familiar, and repeated across generations. It is not the tea itself that comforts, but the pattern, the knowledge that this has been done before and will be done again. Even animals became part of these traditions. A camel kneels at the same signal, taught by years of repetition. A goat follows the same path back to the tent, remembering the turns without being told. These patterns, ingrained over time, gave a sense of stability in a place where sand shifted constantly, erasing footprints and dunes alike. The land changed daily, but the gestures of living remained steady. Perhaps the quietest shock in all of this is how easily these familiar patterns could be overlooked by outsiders. A visitor might see only hardship, people in plain robes, children with dust on their feet, tents low to the ground. But beneath that simplicity was a tapestry woven of rituals so consistent that they anchored entire communities. Where the land gave no certainty, the people created it with their hands. Closer to home, we feel the same. A grandmother might stir sugar into her tea the same way her mother did, with 2 careful turns of the spoon. A grandfather might set his shoes by the same corner of the door each night. These are not accidents. They are quiet echoes of a rhythm that has carried humanity for centuries. Now imagine a woman adjusting her scarf before stepping out into the desert. She does not look in a mirror. There is none. Instead, her fingers, guided by memory, fold and twist until the fabric rests just so. This is not vanity. It is protection, and it is tradition. Her mother showed her once, long ago, and now the gesture lives in her hands. One day she will show her daughter the same fold, the same knot. In this way, the pattern continues, unbroken across time. There is a comfort in knowing that our hands remember what our minds might forget. The act of kneading bread, of braiding hair, of smoothing the corner of a rug. All of these gestures become second nature. They hold the weight of tradition without needing to be spoken. And in them, we find connection to our families, to our communities, to those who lived before us. In the desert evenings, when the air cooled just enough for stories, families gathered around fires. The sparks rose, and so did the familiar gestures. A father lifted a cup to his lips. A mother passed dates into small hands, A child leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, knowing she would always find the same spot waiting. None of these acts were extraordinary, yet together they were everything. And sometimes, amid these patterns, came a sudden interruption, the kind that revealed just how much we relied on them. A storm might sweep across the dunes, rattling the tent flaps. The routine of folding cloth and tying knots was tested. If someone forgot their role, the sand would pour in, suffocating the calm. It was then that the value of each tiny gesture was revealed. What looked ordinary became essential. The quiet shock here is simple. Tradition is not just memory, it is survival. The fold of fabric, the pouring of tea, the kneeling of a camel. These were not decorations. They were the scaffolding of endurance. And to neglect them, even once, could unravel the fragile balance of life. We know this in our own way, too. When illness or loss interrupts our routines, the world feels disordered. Only when the familiar gestures return, a meal prepared, a bed made, a voice calling us to the table, do we feel grounded again. We may not realize it until the moment they vanish, but these small acts are what keep us steady. Picture, finally, the listener by her window. She turns off the lamp, not abruptly, but with the same motion she has used for years. The room dimensions. She sips the last of her tea. Her shawl slips into place across her shoulders. Each gesture is her own thread in the fabric of tradition. She may not think of it this way, but she is performing the same rituals her ancestors once did, finding peace in patterns too ordinary to name, yet too vital to abandon. Obstacles arrive politely, shaping the pace of life. Obstacles do not always crash into our path. Sometimes they arrive with quiet courtesy, waiting for us to notice them. They do not roar like lions or thunder like storms. Instead, they lean in softly, like a closed door in a hallway, a stone in the shoe, a gust of hot wind that makes us pause. These are the obstacles that shape the rhythm of life, not by force, but by insistence. In the desert, obstacles were constant companions, not the kind that made themselves into drama, but the kind that simply refused to be ignored. The heat, for instance, did not shout. It pressed, it did not rage, it remained, steady and relentless. To ignore it was impossible. To fight it was foolish. So the people learned to accept it as part of their daily script. The heat was an obstacle, but one that demanded patience rather than defiance. Think of a traveler who sets out too late in the morning. At first, the path seems manageable. The air is warm, but tolerable. Yet by midday, the warmth has become fire, pressing from every side. The obstacle reveals itself, not as a sudden wall, but as a gradual weight that can no longer be carried. The traveler learns, perhaps too late, that the desert does not bend to determination. It bends only to respect. There is a quiet shock in this lesson. We are taught so often that persistence conquers all. But in places like the desert, persistence without wisdom leads to ruin. Obstacles are not always conquered. Sometimes they must simply be acknowledged, accepted, and circled around. Even in daily routines, silent obstacles appeared. A water skin might spring a leak, not a dramatic burst, but a slow seep, unnoticed until thirst grew unbearable. A rope might fray, fiber by fiber, until the knot gave way. These small failures were obstacles too, reminders that life could be undone not by storms alone, but by silence, by subtlety, by the things that went unseen until it was almost too late. And yet, there was dignity in facing them. A father teaching his son to check every strap before travel was not being overcautious. He was passing on survival. A mother reminding her daughter to count dates before storing them was not fussy. She was guarding against hunger weeks away. Obstacles did not only arrive from outside, they arose from inattention, from forgetting to respect the small details. We know this truth in our own lives, though the scenery is different. The obstacles that trouble us most are often quiet. The ache in the knee that whispers we should slow down. The unopened bill on the table that nags from the corner of the eye. The phone call we postpone, telling ourselves there will be time later. None of these obstacles shout. Yet left unattended, they shape our pace, our choices, our peace. Picture a desert family pausing their journey because a sandstorm has risen on the horizon. They do not shake their fists at the sky. They do not attempt to outrun the shifting wall of dust. Instead, they stop, lower the tent flaps, and wait. The storm passes. The sand settles. And when they step out again, the path remains. The obstacle did not destroy them. It delayed them. That is its nature. The shocking part, though quiet, lies in how these delays become part of life itself. A journey across the desert was never a straight line. It was a series of pauses, diversions, and adaptations. To the outsider, it might look like inefficiency. To those who lived it, it was wisdom. A conversation with obstacles that never ended, always negotiated, never fully won. There is a beauty in this acceptance. The desert taught its people that not every obstacle must be overcome at once. Some must simply be endured. Some must be sidestepped. Some must be welcomed even, for they offer rest disguised as delay. In pausing for a sandstorm, the body regains strength. In stopping for shade, the mind clears. Obstacles become unexpected gifts, granting moments of stillness that might otherwise be lost. Consider again our listener by her window. The clock ticks softly. Perhaps she feels the weight of sleeplessness, the mind circling when it should rest. This, too, is an obstacle, silent, persistent, polite in its own way. She cannot force sleep to arrive, just as a traveler cannot force the desert to cool. But she can sit with it, acknowledge it, and let the rhythm of story and time carry her forward until rest comes of its own accord. The desert people found dignity in this surrender. They walked not as conquerors, but as companions of the land. Every obstacle, silent or sudden, was part of the dialogue. The sun said, "Not now." They replied, "We will wait." The sandstorm said, "Not yet." They answered, "We will rest." It was not weakness. It was wisdom carved into the bones of generations. And in our own lives, perhaps we can listen the same way. Obstacles need not always be fought. They can be acknowledged, accepted, and even thanked. For in slowing us down, they remind us that life is not a race, but a rhythm. Silence itself becomes a patient traveling companion. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness. We imagine it as a hollow space, an absence of sound, a void waiting to be filled. But in truth, silence carries its own presence. It can walk beside us like an old friend, sometimes stern, sometimes kind, always patient. In the desert, silence was not a stranger. It was a companion. Imagine the stretch of dunes at noon when even the camels fall quiet. The sun presses so heavily that voices feel like wasted effort. Words dry on the tongue before they are spoken. So the people walked without speech, listening, instead, to the crunch of sand beneath hooves, the creak of leather straps, the soft rhythm of breathing. In such moments, silence was not emptiness. It was the music of survival. There is something quietly shocking about this. We live now in a world where silence is rare, even feared. Radios hum, televisions chatter, phones buzz and blink. The absence of noise unsettles us, as though we might vanish into it. But the Bedouins found the opposite. Silence gave them strength. It spared them from wasting breath, conserved energy, and sharpened their awareness. In silence, they could hear the small signals that meant survival: the change in wind, the shift of an animal's gait, the distant call of a bird marking water. Silence was also a form of respect. Around the fire at night, words were not poured out carelessly. They were measured, spoken when needed, left unspoken when enough had already been said. The pauses between stories mattered as much as the tales themselves. In those pauses, children leaned closer, elders gazed into the flames, and everyone felt the weight of belonging. Silence held them together. Consider how silence can soften even hardship. A family resting in their tent during a sandstorm did not fill the air with complaints. They sat quietly, listening to the sand strike the canvas like 1,000 fingers drumming. Each person knew that their stillness helped preserve calm. To give in to panic would waste energy. To honor silence was to endure. The shock, subtle as it may be, lies in how silence can speak louder than words. When a leader paused before giving direction, the silence told his followers more than any order. When a mother gazed at her child across the fire without speaking, her silence conveyed more comfort than a dozen reassurances. Even the animals seemed to know it. A camel kneeling in stillness beside its master shared a language without sound. In our own homes, silence waits for us too, though we often resist it. We fill the rooms with televisions left running, conversations that loop without meaning, music that drowns out our own thoughts. But when the house finally falls quiet, when the only sound is the tick of a clock or the sigh of the wind at the window, we feel something ancient return. Silence does not empty us, it steadies us. Picture again our listener by her window. The tea is gone now, the shawl drawn close. She breathes into the quiet and notices how the house itself seems to rest. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint movement of curtains, the distant bark of a dog down the street. These are not interruptions. They are part of the silence, companions that do not demand attention. She leans back, lets her eyes soften, and feels the silence surrounding her like a quilt. Silence was also a teacher in the desert. It taught patience. A thirsty traveler could not rush the camel to water with shouts. He had to walk quietly, trusting the animal's instincts, conserving his own strength. It taught humility. Silence reminded them that no words could command the sun to set sooner, nor could they call rain from the sky. And it taught reverence. The vast stillness of the desert at night, stars spread in every direction, was a kind of cathedral. To speak carelessly, there felt wrong. Silence was the prayer. One might say that silence was the true map. It marked where the desert was kind and where it was cruel. It reminded the people when to move and when to rest. It let them hear their own heartbeat, steady against the emptiness. In silence, they did not feel alone. They felt part of something larger. And perhaps this is the gentle shock we forget. Silence is not loneliness. It is company of a different kind. When shared with others, it deepens connection. When held alone, it opens space for reflection. In both, it comforts. The listener by her window might discover this too. As the story unfolds, she may notice her own breathing falling into rhythm with the words, then with the pauses between them. In those pauses, silence takes her hand. It leads her patiently into the deeper night. Faces in twilight reflect our own tender stories. As the day gives way to twilight, the desert offers a strange kind of mirror. There is no glass, no polished silver, no quiet pond to lean over. The mirror is in the faces of those who share the fire, In the gentle half-light, every wrinkle softens, every scar deepens, every glance lingers longer than words. It is here, in the fading glow, that people see themselves reflected not in solitude, but in one another. A child may study the face of her grandmother, watching the way the firelight draws lines across her cheeks. She notices how those lines fold into laughter at one moment, then harden into silence at the next. The grandmother does not need to tell stories with words alone. Her face carries generations of them. The girl sees, without needing explanation, the cost of endurance, the grace of survival. There is a quiet shock in this recognition. Faces tell truths that voices sometimes conceal. A leader may speak confidently, but when the firelight catches his eyes, the weariness becomes plain. A young man may joke loudly, but the shadows reveal his uncertainty. In the desert, where honesty was often a necessity, faces became the truest storytellers of all. In our own world, we still know this. We glance at loved ones across a room and read their mood before a word is spoken. A furrow of the brow, a softening at the corners of the mouth, the tilt of a head. These are silent stories. They tell us when comfort is needed, when patience must be offered, when laughter will be welcome. We learn to listen with our eyes. Picture a circle of travelers resting as night approaches. The fire flickers, casting long shadows. One man strokes his beard slowly, lost in thought. Another leans forward, eyes bright, eager to begin a tale. A woman adjusts her shawl, the gesture so habitual it almost seems part of her body. Around them, children peek at the adults' faces, measuring safety, absorbing lessons that will last long after the words are forgotten. Even the animals reflect something of this shared expression. A camel blinking slowly in the firelight seems to carry the same patience as the men beside it. A goat settling down near the edge of the circle mirrors the children's drowsiness. The desert, in its silence, teaches all living things to echo one another. The shock, quiet but undeniable, emerges when we realize how much we rely on this. Without the reflection of other faces, life becomes unmoored. Solitude is survivable, but community is recognizable in expressions. A traveler alone may endure, but it is the glance of another, the small curve of a smile that assures him he is not merely existing, but living. Our listener, sitting quietly by the window, might recall this from her own life. Perhaps the memory of her mother's face as she stitched by lamplight. Perhaps the image of a friend whose eyes crinkled in mirth over shared secrets. These reflections remain even when the people themselves are gone. Faces carry forward in memory, their expressions still guiding us, still reminding us of who we are. The desert gatherings were never about grandeur. They were not courts with gilded thrones, nor theaters with painted masks. They were humble circles of people, bound together by necessity and softened by tradition. And yet, in those circles, more truth was revealed than in any palace, for every face reflected a story, and every story helped another survive the endless sand. There is comfort in remembering that our own faces tell stories too. The lines that deepen with time are not failures, but records. They mark where laughter lingered, where tears once fell, where endurance took root. In the twilight, these marks become beautiful. They connect us to those who came before, and they will guide those who come after. At the edge of the firelight, a child might fall asleep, her cheek pressed into her mother's lap. The mother glances down, her expression tender. The others see it and remember their own mothers. Reflection folds upon reflection until the circle becomes more than a group of travelers. It becomes a mirror of humanity itself, fragile, enduring, endlessly repeating. Small acts of care unlock vast strength in silence. Kindness, when it appears, rarely arrives with trumpets. It comes quietly, almost shyly, in gestures so small they could be mistaken for nothing at all. Yet these small acts, offering shade, sharing water, pausing to listen, were the keys that unlocked survival in the desert. Without kindness, no tent would stand for long, no journey would reach its end, no story would carry through the night. Imagine the simple act of passing a cup of water. The hand that offers does not tremble. The one who receives does not waste a drop. Around them, the sand stretches for miles, silent and indifferent. But in that single act of giving, a bond is forged stronger than ropes, stronger even than blood. To share water was not charity. It was life offered from one to another. The quiet shock here lies in its necessity. To deny water in the desert was to condemn another to death, and such refusal was considered shameful beyond measure. Even enemies, it was said, were to be given drink before disputes could continue. This was not softness. It was law, older and sterner than any decree. Kindness was not an option. It was survival. Children learned it early. A boy might be sent to carry dates to a visiting traveler. He would walk solemnly, balancing the tray in his small hands, knowing that this was no mere chore. It was a lesson in humanity, taught by repetition. A girl might watch her mother pour tea for a stranger, noticing how her mother's eyes softened as she spoke, even when the stranger's story was unknown. These patterns of kindness became keys passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Picture an evening gathering. The wind is cool, the fire steady. A traveler arrives weary, his robe coated in dust, his steps uneven. No questions are asked at first. He is given a seat, a cup of tea, a share of bread. Only after his thirst is eased do the hosts begin to ask who he is, where he comes from, what news he brings. Hospitality was not performance, it was principle. We know this rhythm in our own lives, though often in quieter ways. A neighbor holding open a door, a friend setting aside an extra chair, a family member leaving a lamp on for us when we return late. These gestures are not grand. They are not inscribed in history books. And yet, like the desert's cups of water, they are the keys that unlock strength in silence. The desert people measured wealth differently than we do. A man might have little gold, but if he was known for his kindness, his name carried further than caravans. Tribes gained honor not just through victories, but through generosity, how they welcomed strangers, how they shared what little they had. The quiet shock is this: in the harshest places, kindness was not a weakness to exploit, but a currency more valuable than silver. Even animals were part of this kindness. A weary camel might be given a longer rest, a soft word spoken as its burden was eased. A goat might be fed first, before the family ate. These acts were not sentimental. They were practical. To care for the animals was to care for one's own future. But beneath the practicality lay something more tender. A recognition that all living beings shared the same fragile dependence on water, shade, and rest. Our listener by the window may recall her own keys of kindness. A neighbor bringing soup during an illness. A child placing a flower on her table without a word. A friend sending a letter, written not because it was required, but because care overflowed. These memories linger, not because they were dramatic, but because they were offered freely. In the desert, even a smile could be a key. Picture a weary mother, her arms full of tasks. She looks up, and across the fire another woman meets her eyes, smiling faintly. No words pass, but in that moment, the burden is lighter. A smile, fragile though it may seem, was often the strongest key of all. There is a lesson here worth carrying. Strength is not always built in isolation through grit and defiance. More often, it is unlocked through kindness, through the recognition that no one survives alone, that even the smallest act of care creates ripples wide enough to carry a life. The quietest shock, perhaps, is realizing how often we overlook this. We rush past one another, assuming kindness will come from somewhere else. But in the desert, there was no one else. If you did not offer the key, the door remained closed. If you did not share the water, the journey ended. As the night deepens, the fire burns low, and the people lean closer together. Keys of kindness pass between them, cups of tea, shared stories, soft laughter. The desert outside remains vast and indifferent, but within the circle there is warmth, safety, and the quiet knowledge that kindness endures. The calmest rhythms often rise into unseen peaks. Not every crescendo arrives with cymbals. Sometimes it creeps like a shadow, steady and unnoticed until suddenly we find ourselves at its peak. In the desert, life built toward quiet crescendos, moments that gathered strength silently, then revealed themselves in a way both startling and subdued. These peaks did not roar. They whispered, and the whisper carried further than thunder. Imagine a caravan preparing for travel. At dawn, the camp is hushed. A child tucks a blanket into a saddlebag. A mother ties the last knot of her robe. A father murmurs to a camel, coaxing it to rise. Nothing seems urgent, yet step by step, the quiet rhythm builds. By the time the sun clears the horizon, the camp has vanished, leaving only faint prints in the sand. What began as scattered gestures has swelled into a crescendo, movement, purposeful and unstoppable, achieved without a single shout. The shock lies in the recognition that such crescendos are often invisible until they are upon us. A storm gathering beyond the horizon may look like nothing at first, just a shift in the light. Then, suddenly, the wind rushes, the sky darkens, and the crescendo is revealed. Not in noise, but in inevitability. Our lives echo this pattern. The slow accumulation of habits, the patient building of choices, the daily repetition of small acts, all grow quietly until, without realizing it, we stand at a peak. A relationship deepens, a project reaches completion, a season of life turns. We may not have heard the music rise, but the crescendo has come. The desert people understood this well. Their routines were designed around such subtle build-ups. Resting through the hottest hours might seem uneventful, yet it prepared them for travel at dusk. A single goat hair tent raised quietly in the morning might look like little, yet when the storm came, its strength became clear. The crescendo was not in the noise of preparation, but in the sudden revelation of endurance. Picture a gathering at night. The fire is small, the circle of people quiet. Stories begin slowly. One word here, a chuckle there. As the minutes pass, voices grow stronger, laughter ripples, eyes brighten. By the time the embers fade low, the gathering has reached its crescendo. No one marked the exact moment it arrived, but all felt it. The quiet night became full. The shocking gentleness of these crescendos is their refusal to demand attention. Unlike the noisy triumphs we so often chase, the desert's crescendos came without spectacle. They arrived in silence, revealed in hindsight, and left behind not exhaustion, but calm. Our listener by the window may know this feeling. Perhaps she recalls how a family gathering once shifted from ordinary chatter to sudden warmth, when a single song, softly begun, gathered voices until the room was full. Or how a walk through the neighborhood at dusk unnoticed at first, became radiant when the streetlights glowed all at once. These are crescendos that do not strain, they soothe. The desert itself often created these moments. At twilight, the air cooled, the stars began to appear, one by one, then in clusters, until suddenly the entire sky was ablaze. No one moment marked the change. Yet, looking up, the people found themselves beneath a crescendo of light. The quiet shock of recognition filled them. Beauty could swell in silence. Grandeur could bloom without noise. This truth carries comfort. We need not chase crescendos with restless urgency. They will arrive in their own time through the steady rhythm of small acts. Our task is only to remain present, to notice the swell when it comes, to rest in its quiet peak. As the night deepens, the fire dwindles, and voices fall again to silence. The memory of the crescendo lingers, not as a roar, not as a blaze, but as a calm fullness. It assures the people, and us, that even in the quietest lives, crescendos wait, gentle, inevitable, and deeply kind. Even in calm lands, surprise walks with us quietly. Surprise does not always leap from behind doors or shout in our faces. Sometimes it arrives as softly as a shadow, stretching long across the sand at dusk. It does not hurry. It does not alarm. It simply reminds us that even in the most predictable routines, the unexpected waits, patient and calm. In the desert, surprises came not as entertainment, but as lessons. A day could begin with perfect stillness, the air cool, the sky pale. Yet by afternoon, a wind might rise and scatter tents. Not a violent storm, just enough to remind the people that nothing in the desert could be owned. Not shade, not silence, not certainty. Each surprise was a whisper from the land. Be ready, but do not fear. Picture a traveler pausing to tie his sandal. In that moment, he notices something unusual, a small sprig of green rising from the sand. It seems impossible in such a barren place, yet there it is, a fragile plant, announcing water beneath the surface. This small surprise changes everything. What looked like endless emptiness becomes a place of promise. A shadow lengthens, and with it comes hope. The quiet shock in these moments lies in their gentleness. We are taught to expect surprise as drama, a sudden announcement, a loud burst. But the desert shows us another kind, the surprise of discovery, the revelation hidden in ordinary scenes. A misplaced track in the sand may reveal that animals passed nearby. A shift in the stars may reveal that dawn is close. These surprises arrive without noise, yet they change the story entirely. Our listener may recall similar moments from her own life. Perhaps the memory of finding an old photograph between the pages of a book, forgotten for years. Or the time a neighbor knocked softly to deliver a pie, unasked for, on a lonely afternoon. These surprises did not shock the heart into racing. They soothed it into slowing, reminding her that life still held gentle mysteries. In the desert, shadows themselves were full of surprise. By day, they offered refuge, but at dusk they lengthened and shifted, reshaping the landscape entirely. A familiar dune looked strange. A trusted path became uncertain. To walk at twilight was to be reminded that even the most known places could wear a different face. The desert whispered, "Never assume you have seen all there is." There is comfort in this. If the familiar can change, then monotony is never final. Even in the same rooms, the same routines, shadows of surprise can stir the heart. A grandchild's laugh, a bird at the feeder, a song carried faintly on the breeze. All are reminders that stillness does not mean emptiness. The desert people learned to welcome these shadows. They did not curse a sudden shift of wind. They adjusted. They did not fear the sight of unfamiliar stars. They read them. Each surprise was folded into the rhythm of life, accepted as naturally as breath. This, too, was survival, not in resisting the unexpected, but in embracing it as a companion. The quiet shock here is how surprises, even the smallest, can carry great weight. A single well found by chance meant life for a family. A single piece of news carried by a traveler shifted the mood of a whole camp. Surprises were not interruptions. They were chapters, waiting to be read. Our listener, leaning into the night, may smile at her own memories of such shadows, the way a stray cat once appeared at her door and stayed, the way a phone call came, years ago, just when it was needed most. These were not accidents. They were shadows of surprise, reminding her that life's rhythm holds more than repetition. As the fire burns low, shadows lengthen across the faces gathered. Someone shifts, someone sighs, and in that simple moment, the group feels the presence of change. No storm, no noise, just the subtle acknowledgement that tomorrow will be different from today. That is surprise, not a roar, but a whisper. A calm crest rises, soft as a distant tide. Not all waves roar. Some rise so gently that you hardly notice until you are lifted by them, carried without resistance, borne along by their quiet strength. In the desert, these gentle crests came not from water, but from the rhythm of days and nights, the steady patterns that built until they reached a height that surprised only in its softness. Picture the caravan after many days of travel. At first, the footsteps drag, the animals plod, and the sun weighs heavily on every movement. But slowly, through repetition, a rhythm develops. The group learns when to rest, when to rise, how to breathe with the desert instead of against it. Then one evening, almost without realizing it, they cover more distance with less effort. Spirits are lifted. Laughter comes more freely. The crest has arrived, not in a shout, but in a sigh. The quiet shock is that effort itself can turn gentle. We imagine struggle as constant strain, but when habits align with the world's rhythm, even difficulty becomes smooth. Like a tide, steady and certain, it carries us further than we expect. In our own lives, this crest comes too. A long season of caregiving, of work, of patience may feel endless. Yet one day, something shifts. The weight is no lighter, but the heart has grown stronger. A quiet tide rises within, and suddenly what once felt impossible seems manageable. We may not see the moment it began, but we feel ourselves carried. The desert people honored these crests. They did not rush them, nor did they fear their passing. They simply recognized the rise, leaned into it, and allowed it to carry them. It was the reward for endurance, the gift of rhythm. At night, around the fire, this crest was felt in the mood of the circle. The evening might begin with silence, each person wrapped in private thought. But as the tea warmed, as the fire cracked softly, voices rose. Stories lengthened, laughter stirred. The fire itself seemed brighter. Then, without warning, the circle reached its height. Everyone present, everyone alive. The desert momentarily forgotten. The crest of community, breaking gently, leaving peace in its wake. Our listener may know this well. Perhaps she remembers the crest of a family gathering long ago, when small conversations swelled into a shared song, or the quiet rise of her own courage when she faced something daunting and found herself stronger than expected. These crests are not dramatic, but they change the shape of memory. Even the land knew such moments. After weeks of dryness, a rare rain might fall. At first, drops tapped lightly on canvas, barely noticed. Then the air shifted, the earth released its scent, and the parched desert sighed with relief. Within hours, tiny shoots of green appeared, a gentle crest of life returning. It did not roar like a flood. It arrived with grace. The gentle crest is also found in silence itself. A pause in conversation may stretch until suddenly everyone feels the weight of shared thought. It is not empty. It is full, brimming with recognition, the crest of understanding. The quiet shock here is that such peaks do not exhaust us. Unlike loud triumphs that leave us weary, these crests restore. They lift us gently, set us down softly, and remind us that even in struggle, the rhythm of life has its mercies. As the fire dims and the people drift toward rest, they carry the crest with them, not in noise, but in calm hearts. The desert outside remains vast and silent, but within, there is a tide of peace rising quietly, soft as breath. A subtle shock whispers truths no words can hold. Shock does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes so quietly that only the heart feels it, a pause that ripples through memory and lingers like an echo. In the desert, such shocks were woven into life, not the jarring kind that sends panic racing, but the hushed revelations that rearrange how one sees the world. Imagine a camp where laughter hums, tea steams, and children chase shadows near the tents. Everything is as it has always been. Then, in the middle of the chatter, a traveler speaks of a well gone dry, a spring that once flowed, now silent. The group falls quiet, cups pause mid-air. The truth settles with the weight of sand. It is not a scream, not even a sigh. It is shock, silent, steady, undeniable. The desert often gave these moments. A path believed safe may lead to emptiness. A star once trusted may vanish behind dust. A friend long expected may not return. None of these events came with fanfare. They arrived like whispers, yet carried the strength of storms. The quiet shock is not cruel for cruelty's sake. It teaches. It presses upon the heart that nothing can be assumed, that life shifts beneath our feet, even when we think the ground is solid. In this way, the desert was a tutor, stern but patient, shaping people who could bend without breaking. Our listener may know these silent shocks too. Perhaps she recalls the moment she realized her children had grown and left, the house echoing with absence, or the day a letter arrived, not with the news she hoped for, but with words that would reshape her days. These memories are not loud. They are quiet weights that remain, shaping her strength even now. In the desert, responses to such shocks were deliberate. No wailing, no chaos. Instead, people paused, adjusted, and continued. A tent might be shifted to another place, a route redrawn, a prayer whispered. The lesson was simple. Shock is not the end. It is a turning. Yet, the silence of these moments held power. Around the fire, when the story of loss was spoken, no one interrupted. Silence itself became a vessel, carrying grief more surely than words. In that hush, people felt each other more deeply than through speech. The shock was not only in the news, but in the sudden weight of shared quiet. The desert sky often mirrored this. A shooting star, brief and bright, would vanish before anyone could point. The silence afterward was heavy with awe. Shock does not need permanence to matter. Even fleeting light can carve itself into memory. There is a paradox here. Silent shocks can hurt, yes, but they also reveal resilience. They show us what can be endured, what must be cherished, what cannot be postponed. A dry well shocks us into valuing water. A lost path shocks us into sharpening our memory of the stars. A passing glance, more meaningful than expected, shocks us into remembering that love exists in the smallest spaces. Our listener, leaning into the night, may find comfort in this. The shocks she has endured have not undone her. They have reshaped her quietly into someone with depth, patience, and the wisdom to rest in stillness. As the firelight fades and the group lies down, the silent shock lingers, not heavy, not cruel, but present, a reminder that life holds both surprise and endurance in equal measure. The desert does not apologize for its lessons, it simply teaches. And the people, shaped by silence, carry the lesson forward. Balance returns gently after the passing storm. Every storm, no matter how fierce, eventually passes. And in its wake comes not silence alone, but balance, the careful, deliberate settling of the world into a new rhythm. The desert knew this truth better than most. After the shock of sudden winds, after the silence of a vanished spring, there came a return. It was not the same as before, but it was enough. Picture a camp after a sandstorm. The tents are coated in dust. The ropes sag. Children cough softly, eyes still wide from the storm's fury. Yet one by one, hands begin to work. A flap is retied, a fire coaxed back to life, a pot set gently on embers. Soon the ordinary hum of life resumes. It is not triumph, but balance restored. The quiet shock is that resilience does not roar. It whispers through steady hands and calm voices. Our listener may recall her own seasons of storm, times when grief, illness, or sudden change swept through, leaving her uncertain, unsteady. And yet, over days, life resumed. Meals were cooked, doors opened, birds returned to their perches. The storm did not erase balance forever. It only shifted it, and balance returned, softer, wiser. The desert people embraced this rhythm. They did not expect permanence. Balance to them was like water, rare, precious, but always flowing back eventually. A well might dry, but another would be found. A friend might be lost, but stories of them kept the circle whole. To live was not to demand unbroken calm, but to trust the return of balance after each disruption. Imagine a twilight after long heat. The air, once burning, cools suddenly. A breeze moves gently across the dunes, carrying the scent of earth still warm, but no longer punishing. In that breeze, people feel balance restored. They can breathe fully again, laugh again, even if softly. The desert seems to apologize, not with words, but with relief. Balance also appeared in ritual. After news of loss, families gathered, not to erase grief, but to hold it until it grew lighter. They poured tea slowly, each cup a reminder that life continued. They sang low songs, not of triumph, but of memory. Balance was not denial. It was a tender arm placed around sorrow until it could walk on its own. Our listener may recognize this. After funerals, after hard farewells, she may have found balance not in grand gestures, but in small rhythms, the kettle's whistle, the turning of pages, the simple act of opening curtains to morning light. Balance comes quietly, often disguised as ordinary tasks. The desert sky carried this lesson too. After storms, the stars returned, brighter for the cleansing of the air. Each constellation shone like a promise. Nothing is lost forever. What is hidden will reappear. What is shaken will settle. Even the horizon, blurred by sand, grew sharp again. Balance restored itself with patient inevitability. The quiet shock is how peace often feels fragile, yet proves enduring. We expect recovery to be dramatic, but more often it arrives in small ways. A steady breath, a shared smile, the slow mending of fabric once torn. In these small ways, balance proves itself stronger than disruption. As the fire circle reforms, voices soften, A child hums a tune. An elder speaks gently of stars. The desert, vast and indifferent, hums too, though in its own language of wind and silence. In this shared calm, balance is not just restored. It is cherished, understood as a gift that must never be taken for granted. Life flows on, steady as the desert's breath. Continuance is not drama. It is not a banner waved, nor a trumpet sounded. It is the quiet rhythm that follows each disruption, the soft beat of footsteps that refuse to stop. In the desert, continuance was not choice. It was necessity. And in that necessity lay a kind of grace. For even when storms swept tents aside, even when wells went dry, life did not halt. It moved, slowly but surely, always forward. Picture a caravan at dawn. The air is still cool, the sand firm beneath the feet of camels. The people rise, not with shouts, but with murmurs. A rope tied, a pot lifted, a child wrapped in cloth. Each act seems small, unremarkable. Yet together they form a pattern. Continuance. Day after day, these motions repeat until they become more certain than the horizon itself. The quiet shock lies in how this persistence does not weary, but steadies. We imagine repetition as dull, but for the desert people, it was safety. To do what was done before was to honor survival, to trust that the path, though long, would carry them. Our listener may remember this rhythm in her own life. Morning routines carried out year after year, folding laundry, setting the table, watering plants. At times they seemed ordinary, even tedious, yet those very acts became anchors, proof that life continued through joy and through grief alike. The small rhythms held her steady when larger events threatened to sweep her away. The desert landscape itself embodied continuance. Wind sculpted dunes not in a single moment, but over years, shaping curves that seemed eternal. Stars wheeled across the night sky with unerring patience, their patterns repeating long after generations of storytellers had passed. Even the silence was a form of continuance, stretching without end, reminding all who listened that time itself never paused. Around the fire, continuance was felt in stories told again and again. A child might protest, "We've heard this one before." Yet still the elder told it, and still, when the story reached its end, the child's eyes shone. For repetition was not waste, it was preservation. It carried the past into the present, ensuring that nothing valuable was lost. The desert people found comfort in such cycles. They did not demand novelty every day. Instead, they leaned into what was known: morning travel, midday rest, evening gathering. The sun rose, the sun fell, the moon waxed, the moon waned. Continuance wrapped around them like a cloak. Our listener might smile at this thought. Perhaps she remembers a lullaby sung to her as a child, and later sung by her to her own children. The words did not change, but the voice did, and still the song endured. That is continuance, not sameness, but a rhythm that adapts without breaking. Even hardship folded into this pattern. A broken jar meant another was made. A lost animal meant more careful watching. A missed path meant learning a new star. Each disruption was swallowed by continuance, the way a river accepts stones and still flows on. The quiet shock, then, is that continuance is more powerful than change. Change may startle, it may wound, but continuance steadies, carries, and eventually outlasts. It is the desert's great secret, that persistence, quiet and unremarkable, triumphs over all else. At night, when the fire died down and only embers glowed, continuance remained. The stars kept their watch. The dunes shifted minutely. The people slept, knowing they would rise again. Continuance asked nothing of them but trust. and in return it gave them tomorrow. Quiet descends, soft as dusk over the dunes. Stillness does not fall suddenly. It arrives like evening, gradual, unnoticed, until the air itself feels heavier with rest. In the desert, stillness was not absence, but presence. The quiet arrival of something vast and unseen, folding itself gently around every living thing. Imagine a camp at day's end. The camels, restless all afternoon, kneel and settle. Fires crackle low, shadows stretch long, and the laughter of children fades into whispers. One by one, voices soften, hands slow, and the night takes shape. There is no announcement, yet everyone feels it. Stillness has arrived. The quiet shock lies in realizing that stillness has weight. It presses upon the heart, not as burden, but as comfort. In stillness, the mind lays down its restlessness. In stillness, the body admits its weariness. The desert people honored this descent. They did not resist. They welcomed it, for stillness meant safety. The day survived, the night beginning. Our listener may know this well. Perhaps she remembers evenings when the house finally quieted. Dishes done, lights low, the world shrinking to a small pool of lamplight and her own breath. That hush was not emptiness. It was fullness, a space where peace could finally be heard. In the desert, the descent into stillness was guided by ritual. A final cup of tea, sipped slowly, signaled that the day's work was finished. A soft prayer, whispered into the vastness, marked the passage from labor to rest. Children were wrapped in blankets, animals tethered near, fires banked to glowing embers. Every act carried weight, each step slowing the rhythm until nothing was hurried. The stars deepened this stillness. At first, a few appeared, scattered pinpricks. Then, as night settled, the whole sky blazed, stretching wider than imagination. The people lay back on the sand, their eyes reflecting the heavens. In that sight, the mind quieted, the heart expanded. The stillness of earth and sky joined, vast and intimate all at once. The quiet shock here is that stillness is not silent. It hums. The soft shuffle of sand, the creak of ropes, the distant breath of camels, all weave into a low music. It is the sound of life slowed but not stopped. To listen is to feel oneself part of something greater, a rhythm that does not need words. Our listener may smile at this memory too, lying awake on a summer night, window open, listening to crickets or the hum of a fan. The sound was simple, unremarkable, yet it filled the dark with companionship. That is stillness, not a void, but a chorus of quiet voices. The desert taught that to descend into stillness is not weakness, it is wisdom. Only in stillness could strength return. Only in stillness could fear be eased. Even conflicts paused at night. Feuds were set aside, if only until dawn. For stillness was sacred, not to be broken without cause. The hush of the fire circle reflected this. Conversations dwindled, not because topics ended, but because words were no longer needed. Presence was enough. A hand resting on another's shoulder, a glance shared across shadows, these spoke more than voices. The stillness itself became the story, carried from one heart to another. The desert sky mirrored the descent. The horizon, once ablaze, dimmed to gray. The moon rose slowly, its pale glow spreading across the sand. Each star took its place, forming constellations that seemed eternal. In their quiet company, people surrendered to rest. The stillness wrapped around them like a cloak, soft and protective. The shock is that in such stillness, one often feels more alive, not less. Without noise, without hurry, the heart notices small things, the warmth of embers, the coolness of sand, the steady rhythm of breath. What was overlooked in motion becomes luminous in rest. As the night deepens, the camp lies quiet. Fires glow faint, camels murmur in their sleep, children breathe evenly. Stillness has descended fully now, and with it comes assurance. The desert, vast and untamed, allows this pause. Tomorrow will rise, but tonight belongs to peace. Reflection lingers, like stars mirrored in still water. Reflection is not something we summon with effort. It arrives quietly, often after stillness has settled, when the noise of the day has dissolved into silence. In the desert, reflection came naturally, carried in the vast spaces of sky and sand. With nothing to distract the eye but the horizon, the heart turned inward, finding in itself a landscape just as wide. Imagine the camp long after the fire has burned low. The embers glow faint. A thin line of smoke drifts upward, and all around lies silence. It is here that reflection begins, not with words, but with memory. A herder recalls his father's voice teaching him the constellations. A mother thinks of the child she lost, her grief softened now by years, but never erased. A traveler wonders at the roads left behind, and those yet to come. In reflection, each life feels both small and endless, a single thread woven into the desert's vast tapestry. The quiet shock is how memory changes in reflection. What once felt sharp softens, like stone rounded by years of wind. Pain becomes lesson, joy becomes gratitude. Even mistakes lose their sting, leaving only the wisdom gained. Reflection does not erase the past. It folds it gently, like cloth placed in a chest, ready to be opened again when needed. Our listener knows this well. Perhaps she has sat in her chair at evening, the house quiet, her hands resting in her lap. She thinks of days gone by, faces that smiled once, voices that rang through kitchens, places walked long ago. In the quiet, those memories do not ache as they once did. They glow, gentle and steady, lighting the mind like lanterns. That is reflection's gift. The past returned not to wound, but to soothe. The desert sky deepened this process. Stars were more than lights. They were stories, markers, reminders that nothing truly vanished. A child might ask, "Where does grandfather go when he dies?" And the elder would point to the stars. There. Not as doctrine, but as comfort. Reflection took the sharpness of loss and replaced it with connection. Every glance at the sky became remembrance. In reflection, time itself shifted. Hours slowed, days stretched, years folded together. The desert did not measure time by clocks. It measured by seasons, by journeys, by the rhythm of return. Reflection carried that same quality. The past was not gone. It was simply another horizon, visible if you looked long enough. The quiet shock here is that reflection, though silent, has weight. It shapes the present. A decision is softened by memory of past mistakes. A kindness is offered because one recalls the pain of being without. Reflection is not indulgence. It is guidance, a teacher that whispers rather than commands. The people of the desert made space for this. In long pauses around the fire, no one rushed to fill silence. Reflection was honored. It was understood that wisdom came not only from words, but from the spaces between them. In those spaces, hearts spoke to themselves and to one another without interruption. Our listener may nod at this. Reflection has visited her often, sometimes in the middle of a restless night, sometimes in the middle of folding clothes, sometimes at a graveside. Always quiet, always insistent, always bearing both sorrow and peace. She knows its truth. Reflection deepens life, even when it slows it. The desert's gift was to show reflection outwardly, The endless sand mirrored the endless mind. The shifting dunes echoed shifting thoughts. The returning stars mirrored memories that never fully fade. To walk the desert was to walk the corridors of one's own soul. Each step pressed into the sand was also pressed into memory. The quiet shock is that in reflection, even loneliness is softened. Alone under the stars, a person might feel small. But reflection reminds them, smallness is not emptiness. Smallness is part of the whole. To be a single grain in the desert is still to belong. As the night deepens, reflection lingers. It does not press for answers. It simply waits, patient as the desert, willing to walk beside whoever dares to pause. And in that pause, peace grows, steady as the stars, quiet as the breath of a sleeping child. Farewell drifts slowly as fires dim and voices fade. Return is never sudden in the desert. It does not come with a rush, nor with a shout. Instead, it slides gently into the edges of awareness, as steady as the night wind that cools the dunes. After reflection has held its long gaze, the heart begins to turn outward again, slowly, carefully, as though waking from a dream. Picture the camp in the deepest hour of night. The flames have settled into quiet embers, their light low and amber. Around the circle, people sit in silence, each lost in private thought. Then, almost imperceptibly, a voice stirs. Not a grand speech, not a declaration, just a soft word, perhaps a reminder that dawn will come, or a simple blessing for safe rest. The silence breaks, not with rupture, but with ease. The people return to each other. This is the soft return, not the end of reflection, but its gentle weaving back into life. Reflection teaches, but it is not meant to hold us forever apart. The heart, having looked inward, now looks outward again, toward companions, toward tomorrow, toward the slow rhythm of continuance. Our listener may know this feeling. After long grief, there comes a morning when laughter returns, hesitant but real. After long quiet, there comes a moment when conversation feels welcome again. These are not leaps, but steps, soft, returns, like embers finding a new breath of air. The desert gave form to this rhythm. Nights could not last forever. No matter how deep the reflection, no matter how strong the silence, the sun would rise. And so, the people learned to let the night carry them inward, but also to let the dawn bring them back. Balance was not only about enduring storms, it was about returning from stillness without losing its gift. Imagine voices low around the last glow of fire. An elder tells one final tale, not the grand epics of ancestors, but a short memory, tender, almost ordinary. Laughter ripples softly, not loud enough to disturb the stars. Hands move to pour the last of the tea. Someone hums a tune, the melody so familiar it seems older than time. The circle breathes together again. Reflection remains, but now it is shared, lighter, softened by company. The quiet shock lies in how gentle this return can be. We often expect renewal to roar, to announce itself with banners, but in truth, return is almost invisible. It is a hand reaching across the fire. It is a nod of recognition. It is a smile caught in firelight. Nothing more, nothing less, and yet everything. Our listener might recall this in her own life. Perhaps after days of solitude, she received a call from a friend. The conversation was brief, but afterward, the air felt lighter. Or perhaps she remembers sharing a quiet meal with family after loss, the food plain, the silence still heavy, but the presence of others enough to bring her back. These are the soft returns that heal without fanfare. The desert taught that life is not made only of storms and silences. It is made also of these small returns, these gentle recognitions that we belong, that we are not alone. After the hardest nights, after the longest reflections, people found each other again, and in finding each other, they found themselves anew. As the camp prepares for sleep, the fire reduced to glowing ash, each person folds into blankets. The stars wheel slowly overhead, patient, unbothered. A child sighs in their dreams. A camel shifts, settling its weight. The hush remains, but now it is no longer heavy. It is warm, shared, safe. The return has taken place. The soft return does not erase what came before. The storms, the shocks, the reflections remain part of the story, but it folds them into the larger rhythm where hardship and stillness give way to companionship and companionship to rest. In this way, life holds together, a circle unbroken. The desert knows no permanence, but it knows return. The stars return each night. The sun returns each morning. The wind returns after every pause. And people, fragile though they may seem, return too. Always softer, always wiser, always carrying the gifts of what they have endured. Tomorrow waits lightly in the promise of dawn. Dawn does not rush. It enters slowly, as if reluctant to disturb the careful stillness of night. Long before the sun breaks the horizon, the desert begins to whisper of morning. The air grows cooler, then warmer again. Shadows shift, soft and long. A pale light brushes the dunes, delicate as breath against glass. The world tilts, not in thunder, but in promise. For the desert people, dawn was both ending and beginning. It closed the night of reflection, of silence, of story, and opened the path toward continuance. They stirred gently, not hurried. A hand stretched, a rope pulled taut, a kettle placed once more upon the fire. Life moved forward, as though it had never paused, yet in truth, the night had changed them. The stillness had left its mark, the reflection had softened the heart, the soft return had bound them again together. Our listener knows this too. There are mornings after long nights when she feels not renewed with sudden energy, but steadied. The night, even if restless, gave her something. The memory of stars, the hush of wind, the sound of her own breath steadying her. Dawn does not erase the night. It carries it forward, like a gentle companion walking beside her. In the desert, dawn was practical. Travel began again, for the cool hours before heat were precious. Yet it was also sacred. To watch the sky shift from indigo to rose was to glimpse eternity. Every sunrise was both familiar and new, a return that never grew ordinary. People paused, even as they packed, to look. Children blinked at the horizon, elders murmured prayers, camels lifted their heads and sniffed the air. All life turned toward the light. The quiet shock lies in how simple dawn is. It does not roar, it does not dazzle with noise, it merely reveals what was always there. The sand glows golden, the sky opens wide, the faces of companions are lit, soft and real. In that moment, all that seemed heavy at night grows lighter, manageable, even tender. Our listener might think of her own mornings, opening curtains to a thin band of light, hearing the faint bird song that insists, no matter the grief of yesterday, that today has arrived. Boiling water for tea or coffee, the sound small but steady, a ritual as old as memory. These are not grand gestures. They are dawn's promises, humble yet profound. The desert people understood dawn as balance. It was not triumph over night, nor dismissal of it. Night had its place, its wisdom, its gifts, but dawn offered return, the chance to walk once more. The people carried their memories, their reflections, their sorrows, and their joys into the light. Nothing was left behind, but everything was softened. Imagine the caravan beginning its slow departure. Footsteps press into cool sand, voices low, carrying the rhythm of continuance. The sun, still low, throws long shadows ahead, as though guiding the way. Behind them lies the night, not lost, but folded into the day. Ahead lies the horizon, infinite, promising, open. The quiet shock here is that dawn, though gentle, contains the same power as any storm. It changes the world utterly, but without force. With nothing more than light, it transforms the desert into gold, the sky into endless blue. And so it transforms the heart, too, offering hope, not as command, but as invitation. Our listener may feel this now. Even if she lies in bed, eyes heavy, she can sense that promise. Tomorrow waits, quietly, without demand. Whether she wakes to it in hours or drifts into it through dreams, dawn will come. It always does. It does not ask her to be ready. It arrives anyway, patient, steady, kind. The desert people close their nights with blessing. Sleep well, they would murmur. The dawn will find you. To them, dawn was not uncertain. It was sure as breath. That certainty itself was comfort. For even in the harshest land, there was always a promise. Tomorrow will come. What was once survival is now memory. When we look back at the lives of those who crossed deserts, who raised tents of goat hair and sipped hot tea beneath burning skies, it feels like peering into another world. Their routines, their choices, their quiet resilience belonged to a time when survival was not optional, but constant. To them, every gesture was tied to endurance. To us, those gestures have become stories. Consider shade. For the Bedouins, shade was treasure, the difference between life and collapse. They pursued it with strategy. Tents woven from hair that breathed in heat and swelled in rain, camels standing as living walls against the sun, even small hollows in the sand where one might lie to escape the sky's fury. Today, shade is everywhere, summoned with the flick of a switch, the push of a button. A ceiling fan hums, an air conditioner whirs, trees planted by city planners arch over sidewalks. The quest for shade is no longer an act of survival, but a matter of preference. Yet when we remember how carefully it was once pursued, we see how fragile comfort can be. Think of clothing. The Bedouin robes, loose and light, created moving air, keeping the body cool while protecting against sand and sun. The cloth was not fashion, but wisdom, refined by centuries. Now clothing is chosen for taste, for statement, for color. We can wear shorts indoors in the winter, or heavy coats in cooled rooms in the summer. The body is no longer forced to adapt in the same way, for machines adapt for us. What was once clever necessity is now cultural memory, admired but not required. And water, most of all, water. To the desert people, each drop was sacred. Wells were guarded, sips rationed, sharing considered holy. Even enemies were offered water, for the desert did not forgive waste. Today, we twist a handle and endless water flows, clear, cold, treated. We buy it in bottles, discard it half drunk. What they treasured, we overlook. What they preserved with reverence, we use with carelessness. In this contrast lies both gratitude and warning. But while survival has shifted, reflection remains. They told stories by firelight, repeating lineages and lessons so that nothing would vanish. We too gather stories, though, now on screens, in recordings, through words written and preserved. The circle of listeners has widened beyond one campfire, but the impulse is the same: to remember, to share, to keep alive what time would otherwise erase. Hospitality, too, has transformed. For the Bedouins, to welcome a stranger with tea and bread was to recognize humanity itself, for without such generosity, no one could live. Today, hospitality is more symbolic: an offered seat, a shared meal, a friendly smile in a shop. The stakes are lower, yet the meaning remains. To extend kindness, whether to traveler or neighbor, is still to affirm that we belong to one another. The quiet shock, then, is that though the desert no longer dictates our lives, its lessons linger. We live in homes that do not move. We sleep without fearing the sun. We drink water without ration. Yet deep within us, we still yearn for what they knew: balance, patience, respect for what sustains us. Their world may have vanished, but the wisdom remains, waiting to be remembered. So as we close this long journey together, we look back and honor them, not as relics but as teachers. They survived not by force, but by adaptation, by humility before the land, by kindness toward one another. In a time when survival meant endurance, they showed that gentleness too could be strength. And as our modern world grows louder, brighter, more hurried, perhaps their quiet endurance is what we most need to recall. The pace of yesterday lingers only in memory. Long ago, the rhythm of life was written not by clocks, but by sky and sand. The Bedouin knew no rush of appointments, no endless buzzing of devices, no digital urgency demanding reply. Their days began with dawn's cool mercy and ended when the fire faded and the stars multiplied. Between those boundaries stretched a rhythm dictated by survival and softened by ritual. They rose before the sun had strength enough to harm. Travel, work, and tasks were done in those early hours, when the desert air was still kind. By midday, they stopped, because to resist the sun was to waste strength. Rest was not laziness, it was wisdom. Children napped in the shade, elders sipped tea, and silence wrapped the camp until the heat softened. Then, as twilight came, life returned. Animals gathered, stories told, meals shared. This was rhythm. Wake, pause, resume, rest. A gentle balance with nature, unhurried and forgiving. Today, the rhythm is different. Our clocks ignore the sun. Work demands do not pause for heat or cold. Lights banish night. Alarms force morning. We travel not by stars, but by GPS glowing in our hands. We live by artificial rhythm, efficient, yes, but often restless. To rest in midday feels indulgent. To stop without reason feels wrong. The wisdom of pause has been lost in the shuffle. Think of sleep itself. The Bedouin slept where the ground allowed, under stars, in tents, wrapped against the cold, or stretched in the sand's lingering warmth. Sleep was humble, sometimes, broken by wind, sometimes by animals, but always accepted as it came. They did not measure hours. They measured safety, if the fire burned low, if the camels were near, if family was close. Safety was the lullaby. The stars were their ceiling, eternity their blanket. We sleep differently now. Mattresses shaped to our bodies, machines humming to regulate air, alarms glowing, screens nearby. We may have comfort, but comfort does not guarantee peace. Anxiety hums louder than crickets. Rest is measured, tracked, analyzed by devices, as though quantified sleep could replace the assurance of safety. The Bedouin slept lightly, yet with acceptance. We sleep deeply, yet often without ease. Hospitality shaped rhythm too. A stranger's arrival in the desert rewrote the night. Food offered, tea poured, stories shared until embers dimmed. To welcome was not scheduled. It was instinct, a duty woven into survival. Today, hospitality is often arranged. Dinner invitations penciled between meetings, visits timed to calendars. Generosity remains, but its rhythm has changed. What was once spontaneous is now structured. What was once sacred is now social. And water, again, marked the pace of life. Journeys planned around wells, pauses dictated by need. To drink was not casual, but careful. Now a bottle rests on every desk, a glass on every counter. Hydration is constant, even automatic. The ritual is gone. The urgency too. We sip without thought. The lesson of water's preciousness has faded into convenience. The quiet shock, then, lies in recognizing how the rhythms that once shaped survival now linger only in memory. To pause in midday, to gaze at stars until sleep overtakes, to sip water with reverence. These are not necessities now. But perhaps, in remembering, we can borrow them back. Our listener may smile at the thought. Perhaps she recalls afternoons of her youth when work paused because heat made it impossible, when families sat together in shade, when conversation stretched long without urgency. Perhaps she recalls nights without screens, when the only glow came from lamps or moon, and the silence of the house felt like a friend. Those rhythms, though changed, still live in memory. To compare then and now is not to condemn one and praise the other. It is to notice. The desert people lived slower because they had to. We live faster because we can. But in speed, something is lost. And in remembering their rhythm, we might recover what matters. The pause, the stillness, the chance to breathe without demand. In the end, rhythm is choice. They had little choice, yet found grace in what necessity demanded. We have every choice, yet often forget grace. The lesson remains: to pause, to listen, to align once more with what sustains. Yesterday's meals were survival, today's are choice. Food has always been more than nourishment. It is memory, ritual, a way of binding people together. In the desert, food was scarce, simple, and precious. A bowl of camel, milk, a handful of dates, a round of flatbread pressed against hot stone. Each carried the weight of survival. To eat was not indulgence, it was continuation. Every bite carried gratitude because every bite had been earned. Today, food is abundant for many of us. Supermarkets spread aisles of options. Meals can be ordered with the tap of a finger, delivered hot within minutes. We choose flavors for preference, not for survival. We eat not only when hungry, but when restless, when bored, when comfort is sought. Food is pleasure and variety, rarely scarcity. The old gratitude fades into assumption. The Bedouins gathered not for feasts, but for necessity. Yet those modest meals became rituals of togetherness. Dates dipped into milk, tea poured from worn kettles, bread passed hand to hand. These were gestures that affirmed community. Even the poorest dish tasted richer when shared. A guest was never turned away. To deny food was to deny humanity. Now, our gatherings around food are shaped differently. Dining rooms lit with electric light, long tables with abundance spread across them, holidays marked by roasts and desserts. We celebrate through food, yes, but often the meaning is lost amid excess. Guests are welcomed, but rarely with the same urgency, for hunger is seldom the shadow it once was. We feed to please, not to preserve life. Tea tells this story most clearly. In the desert, hot tea was paradox and wisdom. To sip scalding liquid under a burning sun seemed absurd, yet it cooled the body through sweat, calmed the spirit through ritual, and gathered people into circles. The small cups passed slowly, stories unfolding between pores, silence respected as much as speech. Tea was survival, science, and ceremony all in one. Today, tea or coffee comes in paper cups, carried through drive-through windows, flavored with syrups, swallowed on the way to work. It wakes us, fuels us, keeps us moving. The ritual is shorter, the pause gone. We drink for speed, not for stillness. Tea has become convenience, not companionship. The quiet shock is how a drink that once demanded patience has been stripped of it, yet memory remains. Even in modern kitchens, we pause with a warm mug between our hands, and for a moment we recall what the Bedouins knew, that heat soothes, that sipping slowly steadies the mind, that conversation flows best when the hands are busy with cups. In those pauses, ancient wisdom still stirs. Community once centered on these rituals. After long days of endurance, the circle of tea and bread was more than refreshment. It was affirmation. You belong here. You are safe here. Your story matters. In our world, community takes other forms. Social networks, digital calls, shared meals in restaurants. But the depth is not always the same. Connection is easier, but not always truer. We gather quickly. We scatter quickly. The circle flickers but does not always hold. Our listener may remember family tables of her youth. Simpler meals, fewer choices, but laughter and memory woven into each bite. She may recall grandparents serving bread warm from the oven, tea brewed slowly on the stove, neighbors dropping by with small offerings. Those memories endure, not because the food was rich, but because the sharing was. The contrast between then and now is not condemnation, but reminder. Scarcity forced gratitude, abundance tempts forgetfulness. Yet the heart still longs for the circle, for the shared cup, for the humble meal that means more than flavor. In choosing to pause, to share, to serve, we recover what time has tried to erase. The Bedouins show us that food and drink are not just for the body, but for the soul. They turned survival into ritual, ritual into memory, and though our shelves overflow, the lesson endures. Gratitude sweetens, sharing deepens, and tea, when poured slowly, still whispers of togetherness. Night once meant survival, now it means rest. Long ago, the desert night was no simple backdrop for dreams. It was a force to respect, a presence that shaped every hour after the sun fell. The Bedouins knew that night could soothe, but it could also threaten. Darkness brought cool relief from crushing heat, yet it carried risks, prowling animals, sudden winds, and the uncertainty of silence. Sleep was never assumed, it was prepared for. The camp settled carefully. Tents were lowered, flaps drawn against sand. Fires smoldered low, not just for warmth, but for protection. Fire kept shadows at a distance. Camels huddled nearby, their presence both practical and comforting. Children were wrapped tight in cloth, not only for warmth but for safety, their small limbs shielded from curious insects and the night's chill. Sleep came in fragments, shared among family, guarded by watchful eyes. For the desert people, safety was the first lullaby. Only when the fire burned steady, only when the group was gathered, could they let the body yield to rest. Night was communal. No one slept alone. And if sleep was interrupted, if a sound stirred or the wind howled, it was no tragedy. It was expected. To rise, to tend, to guard was part of the rhythm. Sleep was woven into vigilance. How different it is today. Night, for us, is banished with switches. Lamps blaze, streets glow, screens follow us into bed. Darkness is rare, safety assumed. We do not fear the growl of a jackal or the shriek of wind through canvas. Locks and walls, alarms and lights create the illusion that danger has been erased. We drift to sleep, not because our camp is safe, but because our houses promise it. And yet, sleep does not always come easily. Though sheltered, though comfortable, we often struggle. Anxiety hums louder than crickets. Thoughts run faster than winds. The absence of danger has not created the presence of peace. For the Bedouins, the night was honest. It demanded respect, It revealed stars. It tested patience. For us, night is disguised, filled with noise and glow, yet the heart still longs for quiet. Consider the stars. For desert travelers, the sky was both map and comfort. Stars guided journeys, told seasons, whispered of ancestors. To look upward before sleep was to see vastness and to find place within it. Today, many of us cannot see stars at all. Cities wash them away. The map is lost, replaced by digital directions. We sleep indoors, surrounded by walls, unaware of the sky's patient brilliance. Something is missing. Our listener may remember a childhood when power went out, when the house fell dark, when candles or lanterns lit the rooms. Perhaps she remembers lying in bed, hearing the soft hush of night without machines, watching shadows dance on the wall. That quiet, though fragile, was real. In those moments, sleep felt closer, as if the world itself had hushed. The quiet shock lies here. Though modern life offers comfort, it cannot always offer peace. The desert gave neither comfort nor certainty, yet it gave meaning. To sleep lightly under stars, wrapped in trust and vigilance, was to belong to the rhythm of the world. To sleep heavily in silence today can still feel restless, because rhythm has been broken. But memory can guide us back. To dim the lights, to hush the noise, to let night be night. These are choices we can still make. We may not need to guard against jackals, but we can guard against distraction. We may not need fires to keep shadows away, but we can kindle rituals of calm. In doing so, we reclaim the gift of night, not as threat, not as enemy, but as companion. The Bedouins knew that night was both fragile and sacred. It closed the day with stillness, demanded respect, and gave in return the stars. Their sleep was not perfect, not long, not deep, but it was real, stitched into the fabric of survival. Our sleep, abundant in comfort, yet often lacking in peace, reminds us that safety is not enough. We must also learn, as they did, to accept, to trust, to yield. What was once life is now legacy. When we look back at the world of the Bedouins, their tents of woven hair, their measured steps across dunes, their careful respect for water and shade, it seems distant, almost unrecognizable. Yet within that distance lies something important. Their way of life was once the only way. Today it has become legacy, memory, story. They lived in constant negotiation with the land. Every decision was survival. When to move, where to rest, how to guard children against heat and storm. Their lives were not cushioned by choice. The desert allowed no indulgence, no careless moment, and yet, within those strict boundaries, they created beauty. Songs under stars, hospitality offered even to strangers, stories told by firelight, remembered across generations. Their world was narrow but profound. Today, our lives are wide. We cross continents in hours, drink water without thought, sleep behind walls that mute the wind. We do not measure days by the sun, but by screens and clocks. What they saw as miracle, we see as ordinary. Where they bowed to nature's rhythm, we bend nature to ours. Comfort is abundant, yet contentment is not always certain. The quiet shock of history is that survival does not guarantee peace, and peace does not guarantee happiness. The Bedouins knew struggle, but also intimacy with earth and sky. We know abundance, but often feel distance from both. What they valued instinctively, shade, water, silence, we must now relearn, not out of need, but out of longing. Their legacy is not the hardship itself, but the wisdom hidden within it. Respect for resources, patience in adversity, generosity to guests, reverence for night and dawn. These were not luxuries, they were the foundations of life. In remembering them, we remember something of ourselves that modern life risks erasing. Our listener may think of her own journey. She has seen life change, streets bright where once they were dark, kitchens overflowing where once they were modest, travel quick where once it was slow. She has lived through transformation, and with it, perhaps a sense of loss alongside gratitude. The old ways are gone, yet the heart still treasures their echo. To end this story is not to close it. The Bedouins' world may be past, but its lessons breathe still. When we sip tea slowly, when we pause to watch the light fade, when we choose kindness for a stranger, we keep their legacy alive. What was once life is now memory, and what is memory becomes guide. Modern life will not return to the desert, nor should it, but within us remains the same need for balance, for meaning, for gentleness. Their tents may no longer stand, but the wisdom they carried can still shelter us. Their fires may no longer burn in dunes, but their stories can still warm. And so, as night deepens around us, we hold this truth. Time changes, but human longing does not. We seek safety, we seek connection, we seek rest. Yesterday they found it in goat hair tents beneath stars. Today we find it in quiet rooms, in memory, in story. Different forms, same heart. Their way of life has ended, yet their legacy continues. What was once survival has become story, and story will carry us gently into sleep. Good night.